This is the Build Tech Stack Equity Podcast. We dive into the inspiring stories of underrepresented tech entrepreneurs and investors. This episode is courtesy of Tesoro AI, the #1 recruiting firm for software development and AI talent.
All right, Brandon, welcome to the show. Appreciate you taking some time out to join us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to kick things off, give folks context into who you are, where you're from. And I mean, I know you're a guy who's actually started your professional career on the technical side. So we'd love to hear more about where the interest in tech comes from as well.
Yeah, 100%. So my name's Brandon Tory Thorpe. I'm from Brockton, Massachusetts. I grew up in a deeply religious family. And part of growing up in the church, I got introduced to computers at a very young age and had some financial troubles, had young parents, and ended up kind of dumpster diving and doing all types of things to like get deeper into this computer world. And I wanted to be a hacker since I was like 14. And so I got very passionate about technology, about reverse engineering systems, and just building computers and coding and hacking. So I spent a lot of time in my teenage years doing that.
Interesting. And most folks aren't, I mean, I guess, was it that the church kind of created programs for you to build out those skills? Because, I mean, at least when I was in school, the most we were taught in terms of like tech was, here's how you type. We want to make sure you know how to type. But in terms of like actually getting some coding skills in, we didn't have that. That was something you would have had to learn on your own.
Yeah, no, it really, I think for me, I'm a millennial. So I remember the moment when the internet became a thing. Like, I remember when my dad brought America Online home and it was like, oh, the whole new world, right? So a lot of those early computer programs in the 90s, like you said, it wasn't super technical. It was more like, this is a computer. And everybody was like, oh my God. It was like, this is crazy. So at my church, it was Mount Moriah Baptist Church. The pastor was just a very enthusiastic person about technology. So he had a couple computers downstairs in the basement. And I still remember like the Windows 95 logo and him showing us, here's how you do animation. And so that was just a place where really I started to see the possibilities of what computers could do. But then when I left the church, that was when I was like, okay, I want to be a hacker. Now I'm seeing what's happening in the movies. I'm seeing this whole computer world.
Right.
Hands on these things. How do I build these things? How do I reverse engineer them? So that's really how it happened.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned AOL there. I remember being in chat rooms and I would see folks like post, and it would be like some long scroll that comes down and say created by so. And I was like, wow, how do you actually build that stuff? And I got into it. I think I ended up getting us a virus. So I think that was my end to my hacker days. But cool, man. And so then you went to school, you were engineering in school, computer engineering, electrical engineering, chemical engineering.
Yeah, so I studied electrical engineering. What happened was, I grew up in a neighborhood where hip hop culture was prevalent. A lot of my friends was in the streets, and I'm this kid who's like obsessed with computers. And so those two worlds didn't really go together. Right. And so I actually, for a long time in my teenage years, I didn't want to talk about this passion I have for computers or anything related to technology or math or science. And that's where this word Formless came from, which is the name of my company, which is this idea that our identities can be very fluid. We can be excellent at different things. And this kind of dichotomy of, me being a kid from this neighborhood, so I can't do this thing, or me being from that neighborhood, meaning I can't do that thing. Formless was a word that I used to identify with that kind of broke through that. And so I went on to study electrical engineering. And for me, I had thought at the time that I knew everything there was to know about software because I was so into it as a teenager. Of course, I was wrong. But yeah, I did my formal education in electrical engineering.
Which is interesting, right? You talk about Formless, and it's interesting you see kind of the transition of where we were, right? In your neighborhood, most folks weren't focused on computers. It was more about the music. That was something that was more prevalent, but now you see kind of in the music space where engineers have become more recognized, right? Folks who are actually bringing that technical side to, it's more popular now than it was before, and folks are getting more notoriety. The engineers are getting more notoriety in the music space. For you, so post-graduation, did you go into a technical engineering career? Like, did you start building software from there?
Yeah, so great question. So the first job I got after graduating was at a company called Teradyne. And it's in North Reading, up here in the Boston area. And they do defense contracting for companies like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing. And so I worked in the military and aeronautics group there, and I was doing device drivers and embedded systems. And the engineers there were some of the greatest mentors that I've had in my career. That's where I got my foundation as an engineer, where I really learned the rigor that it takes. So I would spend days with like, okay, shut the phone off, shut everything off, go into the lab, solve this problem, and do not think about anything else until this thing is solved. And so that's when I got my first patent, which was in low voltage differential signaling with FPGAs. And so that was my early career experience. And a lot of the people that worked there, Teresa Lopes, Yannette Arakar, Lloyd Frick, these people were almost like lifelong engineers at this company. Right. And I was this young guy who they were, giving all this wisdom to. But in the back of my mind, I was like, I still want to be creative. I still want to do this artist thing. I still want to see what else is possible. And so that was the beginning of kind of that split for me of like, okay, what am I going to do?
Yeah, interesting. So did you, and I know and I do want to talk about your experiences then moving into big tech. You worked at Apple, you worked at Google, but you talk about this split being an artist. What did that look like for you? Did you hop in, and I'm kind of leading here, but did you hop in and start trying to build a career as an artist? What was that split like for you?
Yeah, it was exactly that. Like in my teenage years, I really rejected the idea of getting into music because it was so stereotypical. Everybody was trying to do that. And I was like, that's not really my thing. I was into sports and other stuff. But then, I think as just a lot of guys from our neighborhoods do, I started to experiment with it. And I just fell in love with this idea of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And what I noticed was so powerful was that I've known people from all different walks of life. So when I was a teenager, I lived in a homeless shelter. And then, as you said, I've worked in these big tech companies. So I've seen people from all spectrums of life. And this idea of storytelling through music has always connected people, no matter how different they are. Mm-hmm. And that's something I was equally obsessed with just as much as technology. And I came up with this idea, music is technology. It's a way for us to share experiences and share consciousness. And so just like anybody else, I got in the studio, I started to tell my story. And it was a way that now I could relate to guys who didn't know anything about technology, but I could say, but I've been through this thing that you've been through. And that was where the power of music really got my attention. And so in 2011, I decided to move to Atlanta and pursue it full-time.
Okay. So you're a full-time artist. Now, was that we'll talk about that, right? So if you're pursuing music full-time as an artist, and then, but like we said, you also had this experience in big tech, and at Google, you even worked on AI projects, right? So I'm just curious what that looked like. And it's interesting to me, right? Because got my degree at, in accounting, got a CPA, then went back and played pro basketball, and then back into finance, right? So it's kind of like it's this crazy dynamic where people think of their career linearly, but there are folks who decide, I'm going to stick a fork in the road right here and, make a different choice for my career. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that from you.
Yeah, the key word you just said is that it's not linear. Like I probably never would have ended up at Google if not for the music journey. So it actually, I left, I moved to Atlanta to go full-time into music. I learned so much there. Then I decided to move to Los Angeles because there were some opportunities there with music. I got an opportunity to work with Timbaland. He discovered me through this song contest that I had won as a writer. And, all that stuff was great. And I was throwing these huge parties, extravagant parties, and dropping mixtapes. I had a song with 24 Hours, who was a popping artist out of LA at the time. And all that stuff was going really well, but I didn't have any money. When you start thinking about the business side, and it's like, well, okay, I know how much I could be making in technology. And as much as I love artistry, I have a son at this point, you know what I mean? So I had to start thinking about the bigger picture of who I am. And that was actually when I decided to get back into big tech. And so I joined Apple at that time. And so from Los Angeles, I ended up moving to Cupertino in 2016 to join Apple at the headquarters and started working on iOS. And that was really cool. That was when I was living both lives at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I got to LA, go to the studio, drive back to Apple, and work full-time throughout the week. And I would kind of context switch between these two worlds. And I called that multi-dream. And it was the idea that you can be excellent at two things at the same time if you can context switch fast enough. Now, I ran into a bunch of challenges with that, but I would say that to me was the beginning of realizing the power of this next generation of human and people like yourself who feel the same way, who feel like well, actually, what I do for my career doesn't have to be so rigid. It doesn't have to be a box. I can do a lot of different things. So that was the beginning of that.
Right. Talk a little bit about, and I know now your focus is more on blockchain. We'll get to that, but we'd love to, just because AI, right, is the buzzword these days, but talk a little bit about your experiences at Google and kind of, I don't want to say, AI has been around for a while, but before it became a household terminology, you were actually working on some of those things inside of Google.
Yeah, so AI, some would argue is the pinnacle of technologies, but the whole purpose of technology was from the beginning to create a machine that could have general intelligence and to be able to repeat the things that we do as humans. So because of this, most engineers for decades have been fascinated by the idea of AI. I mean, it's recently become very explosive. But I had always thought about AI. Other engineers of mine, colleagues, have thought about AI. And Google at the time was renowned as an AI company. A lot of the papers, the research that has come out that actually underpins things we see like ChatGPT came from Google research.
Right.
So, me thinking of that, I had wanted to get experience on an AI team at Google. I really wanted to do that. So I actually was at Apple, and Google has this really interesting recruiting program where they will monitor different things you search. And they will actually track things you search to build a profile about you, and then they'll reach out to you if they think that you could be a good engineer.
Interesting.
Then I was typing some query, I was doing my normal, programming stuff that I do, and the Google screen turns black, and it says, "We like what you're searching for. Do you want to take a challenge?"
Wow.
Engineers cannot say no to a challenge. So of course I say yes, and next thing you know, my beard is this long, and I'm in the black room trying to hack away at this, coding problem that they have me doing, and I get past, 5 levels or whatever, and then a recruiter reaches out and says, "Hey, we want you to interview with us in LA." And so that was the beginning of the journey at Google. And what's nice about Google is once you get through all the interviewing, it was very rigorous interviewing. It was all that, it was phone screens, it was on-sites, it was all that stuff. And I prepared a lot for it. But then once you get through that, you can just pick. You can pick whatever team you want to work on. And I was like, I want to work on AI. So I joined the natural language team. And again, this was just a once in a lifetime career experience because I got to work with some of the best engineers I've ever met in my life. I mean, one of the things about working at Google that's so incredible is you get to get exposed to such a high level of talent that you get to recalibrate your idea of what it means to be a high performer. And so that was what it was like joining Google. And, I absolutely loved, the 4 years that I was there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that actually sounds like something out of a movie. The screen goes black. Somebody's like, would you like to take this challenge? It sounds like one of those Netflix things where you get to choose your journey, right? Yeah. And that dictates how the movie goes. So
I couldn't have even made that up. Like, that's literally what happened.
That's insane. But I mean, smart on their part, right? It's like we could use our technology to find who we think will be the best of the best. So kudos to Google there. If you're a hiring manager and you appreciate the unique skill sets required to build AI solutions, then I would highly suggest you get your hands on our AI talent salary guide. As you know, one of the greatest challenges in building AI products is acquiring the right team. Over 100 plus pages, we dive deep into our global AI talent acquisition strategies. And with our networks in Latin America, we also provide you with actionable advice on how you can scale up your AI team cost efficiently. Once you explore our AI talent acquisition strategies, you'll never look at hiring the same way again. Links are in the description. You ended up coming kind of full circle here then, right? Because you're getting this experience in tech. You have experience in Apple, which has its own kind of position in music. Then Google, get a little bit deeper into the tech, but then you return to your roots around music with Formless. We'd love to learn as you think about Formless. Look, my Google application is turning on, thinks I'm talking to it. But as you think about, the formation of Formless, what was the major pain point that you saw where you decided, look, I need to build some technology to solve this particular issue?
Yeah, great question. So in 2017, this was before I joined Google. I was still at Apple. Right. My wife was working at Morgan Stanley, which is a traditional finance company. And she would come home every day and she'd be on her app buying crypto tokens and talking about blockchain. And she said, "You really need to get into blockchain. This is going to revolutionize everything." Mm-hmm. And I watched a couple of talks and I said, I don't see why this is necessary. All the things they say you can do, you can already do in a different way, better. I don't get it. And of course, my wife is always right about things. So she's like, "All right, well, I just think you should take a look at this," right? Meanwhile, I'm this artist who's like struggling with distribution and controlling all these problems, and I'm like ignoring blockchain. I'm like, that's not the thing. And so when I got to LA, and it was in between when I left Apple and I had some time off to join Google. And I wanted to finish an album, I wanted to finish some creative things before I started the new position. And it occurred to me that one of the biggest problems being a creator, whether you're a musician or not, one of the biggest problems being a creator is this idea of control and growth. And so for me in particular, and my understanding has changed, but at the time I thought the main problem is that every time I take a song and I put it on the internet, I hand over all the control to the company that serves the song to the audience. And what that means is that I can never reconnect with that audience again. I can't set the price to actually make it financially lucrative for myself. I can't do any of the things that I would need to do to build a successful business around music. And although I do understand the games that you can play to be successful in music, maybe I'd be better off as a technologist trying to solve some of those problems, not just for myself, but for other people. And maybe that would be, kind of my calling in a way. And so just to keep it brief and then we can move forward, but the main problem that I had identified was I make a song, I invest thousands of dollars to produce it, I invest thousands of dollars to promote it. I can never make that much money back unless I have 10 million, 100 million streams. And to get that many streams costs more than I would ever make back. And so it's a perpetual cycle of loss.
Right.
And that was the fundamental problem. Now, I've learned new things that have changed the way I think about this, but that was the thing that started it. That was when I said, okay, we can use smart contracts to remove the middleman.
All right, so you mentioned we can use smart contracts to then remove the middleman, and then what was the next step?
Yeah, so the next step was I started to take a more serious look at blockchain technology, because it turned out that the idea I had, which was, well, what if we take every piece of media on the internet, like songs, videos, everything else, and turn them into these little programs that can self-administer the rights management. If they could self-administer the rights management, then they could control the money flow, they could control the relationship with the consumer, they can do all these things on their own. I don't need to trust Spotify or YouTube or Apple Music to do that. The song can do that itself if the song is a program and not just an MP3 file. And so that single idea, it turned out, resulted in me going back to the stuff my wife had talked about with blockchain, because the only way to run a program such that it's not controlled by the government or by an intermediate corporation is for it to run on a new type of computer that's not government or corporate controlled. And a blockchain is exactly that. So a blockchain is a global world computer that can run programs that are not intermediated by the government or by corporations. And so instead of like starting with blockchain, it turned out that the thing I was trying to do, blockchain already solved, and that connected it for me.
Yeah, got it. And just for those who aren't familiar with blockchain, how does that, how do those things work together where, all right, well, this is this global computer. Like, what does that mean? This is this global computer that's not controlled by the government or a corporation. I mean, I know I have my computer, right? I know I can tap into the cloud technology offered by Google, but what does that mean for someone who actually isn't steeped in blockchain?
Great question. One of the best ways to think about this is territory. So in the physical world, we have all these different territories, and we divide them into things like countries. The only reason we do that is because in different countries, there are different rules. And it matters because whoever makes the rules controls how things flow within those territories. It's the same thing when it comes to computers. So on your personal computer, you can make all different types of rules. You have different privacy constraints. You have different things you want to do with your computer. Right. Now, when you take a song and put it on Spotify, it's running on Spotify's computer. And because it's running on Spotify's computer, that means they make all the rules. So there are two solutions to this. You can go to Congress and say, hey, we want you to make a law of the land that says we need to get paid this much. And as a result of that, the law of the land will impact the law of the computer. Right. Or you can go to Spotify and say, hey, Spotify, we're really tired of not getting paid. We need you to change your system. And Spotify can make that decision if they want to or not. The reality is they make the rules because it's their computer. So the idea is, okay, well, I'll make the rules. I'll put the song on my own computer and I'll make all the rules. Okay, great. But your computer doesn't have distribution. There's not a lot of people using your computer or your website. So is there another place where you can put a program where you can make the rules, but it's also widely available? And this is what blockchains do. Blockchains are programmable world computers that are not owned or controlled by anyone. And you can enforce your own rules on this layer without the permission of the government and without the permission of a corporation. And that is a revolutionary technology, not just for music, but for all types of property. You know, it turns out if we look at the history of the world, this idea of property rights, this idea of shared ownership of things is how we got things like corporations. It's how we got things like countries. All these systems of power are built on that very basic idea. Now, if the only way you can tap into those ideas is through corporations or through governments, then it really severely limits the way you can build communities in the digital space. And so that's why blockchains are so important, because it gives us this new place to rewrite the rules of the internet.
Yeah. And so if I'm an artist, right, and I'm thinking about my song as a program that's stored on the blockchain, okay, now I need to think about distribution, the benefit to having a label or Spotify, right? For me to store my song on Spotify, is that Spotify has distribution to all the people who are its users. How does that work when you think about blockchain? Like, what are folks' entry point to then find my music so then I can ultimately, be compensated for what I've created?
Great question. So I'll tell you kind of where we left off in the story with this critical question was asked, and then how it fast forwards into the future. So the question you asked, which is the question that all businesses ask, not just music, but all businesses, is how do you solve the distribution problem? The distribution problem is the number one problem in business, from my experience. And so I'll go back to where we left off, which was, I did all this research. We started to think about these things. I did, 4 years at Google, really loved my time there, but started to get very serious about this idea. So I resigned from Google and I established Formless in 2022 as a corporation. And we go out, we start to think about how to raise money, how to do all these things. And so we build the technology. We build this protocol called Share. And the idea was exactly what we talked about. What if I can take songs, media, all these different things, turn them into these programs, put them on a blockchain, and then get distribution by letting other applications get access to these little mini programs that live on this protocol called Share, almost as if you have these vending machines, these little vending machines that have these experiences like songs or playlists or other things. And those vending machines can live on other properties, like other people's applications. So for example, Spotify, there's no reason they can't, host songs that live on the blockchain in their application. All these different application builders can host these different songs. And now you have this perfect utopian ecosystem where people can get access to stuff they love from any app they want. All the rights are controlled by the artists, so artists get paid fairly. It's completely dynamic. It's no more one flat rate per stream. Everybody's getting paid whatever they want to get paid. All this stuff is a beautiful ecosystem, right?
Right.
Okay, that's the idea. Now the question is, how do you bring that to market, and how do you actually fight the dynamics of the entrenched system to make that happen? And that's the critical inflection point, I would say, in the journey, which is, okay, theoretically you get distribution because other applications build on top of this, but in reality, how do you actually change the incentive structure? Because existing consumer behavior and existing business behavior is already very entrenched. And so that was the critical, I would say, inflection point for us as a business at Formless.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And so if I'm thinking as a creator, right, I've created this program, put it on the blockchain. Now all of these applications, they're able to access it to then distribute the song as well. They have their own compensation structure, so how the artist gets paid. But on the other side, you're saying as an artist, I actually get to determine how I get compensated. So how does that work when, let's say, a Spotify or whoever it may be, they say, we're going to compensate you this base amount per stream. How does that work when I've already created my own rules for how, the amount I receive? Is there any conflict there, or I'm just curious about that particular process, since it's, focused so much on monetization and rights management?
There's a ton of conflict there. And so what happened was I had to revisit what my actual problem was as an artist. It turns out that my actual problem was not monetization.
Okay.
My actual problem was identity and community. And the reason I say that is this: there are tons of successful artists on the internet. And the reason they're successful is because they understand what it takes in terms of the algorithm, to get distribution, and to make money on Spotify, to make money on YouTube. And they're completely willing to do those things, whether that means hundreds of TikTok videos or whatever it is, they'll do that, and they are successful. And so there really isn't a problem with the way that business works. It's working as intended. My problem was very different, which was I don't want to do that. I want to be this right. I want to be this other person. I want to be a multi-hyphenate. I want to be able to design things and create things, and I want to put out the music I want to put out, and I want to build community the way I want to build community. That's a different problem. That's not a monetization problem. And when you realize that, you almost have to go back to the drawing board. And so what I started to realize was, okay, independent of the monetization problem, there's a deeper problem, which is you really need a new way to build community and to build identity on the internet, independent of whether or not that has anything to do with music. It doesn't have anything to do with music. I mean, music is one extension of that. So this brought us down the rabbit hole of kind of rethinking how this all works. Now, granted, the monetization problem still exists, and that still can be solved, but I would argue that it's not the foundation of the actual root cause of what creators and businesses are feeling in terms of pain on the internet. Okay, so what we discovered was that if you take back control of your property, changing the price to make more money is one thing you can do, but it's not the most powerful thing you can do, and it's not the most important thing you can do. What we've actually discovered is that the most powerful thing you can do is invite thousands of other people to be successful along with you for free, depending on how much money you make. In other words, you can give money away rather than try to make money, because it's not about making money. It's actually about building community and establishing identity and establishing a healthy, sustainable growth mechanism with, whether it's your audience as an artist, your community if you're a business owner, or other things like that. And so we went back to the drawing board, thought about this, and realized, okay, let's just pause for a second on the song piece. And let's think bigger about just property, period. What if we take a social media post, like a Twitter post, and we make it community owned? So we say 100 people can co-own this post as long as you retweet it. And if you retweet it, we'll all make money together as the impressions go up. We did this with an artist named Latasha, who's one of the most successful artists in Web3. And immediately it started to go crazy. Everybody started to repost it. It started to get so many impressions that it almost started to feel like an ad, even though it wasn't an ad. It was just community participation and incentivization. Now, what happens with that is now you have this whole different thing where it's not about, hey, I want you to pay more for my music, or I want you to pay more for my video. It's, I want you to be on my team, and I want us to collectively win together. And I'm not going to charge you for it. I'm not asking you to invest. I'm not asking you to do anything like that. I just want you to be a part of this. Right. Retweet it, win it together. Let's have this common goal. That changes the dynamic so much that now you can repeat that process and build these huge multiplayer communities and collectives. And then once your momentum is really high, then you can sell a product. But that product can be whatever you want. And so that's where we came up with this idea of the multiplayer internet. And that's where I did the Instagram post where I talked about, like, yo, this is kind of crazy, like what we just did. And the reaction on Instagram, it got like 12,000 shares and 250,000 views, because everybody was like, oh, this is what we've been waiting for. This is the next iteration of the internet. So my story comes from music, and I started with this idea of, you know, solving rights management music, but it really has evolved to this new place where we're thinking about, okay, the things we learn from music are actually applicable to all different types of community building experiences.
Yeah, and quickly, is it primarily for music artists, or have you now expanded the scope toward anyone who is some sort of a creator?
It's beyond creators, it's beyond music artists, it's literally anybody. It can be a business owner. So we did a partnership with a brand called Pioneers for the Boston Marathon, where we enabled anyone in their community to revenue share on sales if they came to the store over a 48-hour period. We did it with an event called Kickback Boston, where anybody who reshared the post about the event could make revenue in real time. And it got 1,400 shares on Instagram. We've done it with creators, we've done it with brands. So what we've recognized is that the music industry is this microcosm of a lot of problems that are impacting communities, period. But the solution applies to everybody. It doesn't just apply to music.
Yeah, and I'll go back to music, because since we spent so much time talking about it, just thinking about the impact, right? Like, you have an artist who creates a song, and maybe they have not been discovered or hit the mass market yet with their music, but you've got this core group of fans who are hyper excited and just naturally loved, hey, listen to this song, like, you gotta hear this new artist. And so rather than me as an artist going out and creating a street team that's going to go out and be on foot trying to, promote your music, you've actually got a team across the world who is actually a real team. Like, we're working together to promote the music. And I have more than just my passion as far as my reason to help. I can actually participate financially. So both because I'm excited about you as an artist, but I can also participate financially in your overall growth. So it's a win across the board.
Yeah, one of the coolest things we saw is that people actually, what we've seen in our case studies, is that people actually care more about being in than they do about the money that they're going to make. Mm-hmm. So the fact that we are going to make money together and that I can participate, that sells. Right. In and of itself, independent of the amount of money. And then I can join as many of these experiences as I want. And it feels a lot like fantasy. It feels like, I'm involved, I'm in. It feels like a new dynamic on the internet where it used to be, yeah, like, I'm gonna like your post, I'm gonna support you. Whereas now it feels like, okay, dope, I'm involved. And I don't have to pay anything to get involved. I can be involved just by supporting and being a part of this team. And so I think the internet's gonna move from followings to teams. I think it's gonna be more like more tribal. Where it's like, okay, we got 1,000-person team over here. Let's go accomplish this goal, whatever that goal may be. It may be music related. It may not be music related. But this idea of us just following each other and liking stuff, I think that's not going to last.
Yeah, it's interesting. It makes me think about, like, back in the day, somebody hop in the car, you pop the tape in, like, man, let me put you on, man. You got to hear this. This new artist, man. Man, that's crazy, right? I love the idea and just a different way of thinking about approaching the market, and then what the future looks like, which is driven by blockchain. I'm curious, what does it take to build, like, what's the starting point for building blockchain technology?
Oh, good question. I think the best starting point depends on how much experience you have. I'll start from, like, if you're just beginning, the best place to start would be to read the two kind of seminal papers, which was the Bitcoin white paper and the Ethereum white paper. The Ethereum white paper builds on the Bitcoin white paper, but both are very clear and, they're not that long. And you can get an idea pretty quickly of, okay, what this whole thing's about. And then you have to get into the code. You actually have to write a smart contract. You actually have to go through that process, because there are certain things that if you don't do that, you have to take other people's word for what's possible. Mm-hmm. And that's a big problem in technology, especially in innovation, is when you're trying to innovate. And if you don't understand the code, then you're going to be constantly told what you can and can't do. But if you understand the code, then you just say, okay, I know that this can be done. And so that's the best way to start. You read the papers and then you start writing smart contracts. But there's a number of resources on the internet to do that. And then as you grow and scale and build a team, of course, you'll need more engineers to do anything impactful. It's so competitive now that the strategy for building, world-class products has changed, I would say, a lot. And, you absolutely need a team. You need people to help you do it.
Are there certain core skill sets, technologies that you need to build blockchain, right? So if I'm thinking about AI, right, you need someone who understands data science background, who understands how to collect data, understands something like feature engineering, depending on how technical you are, someone who understands model selection, things like that. And so those things are more unique to kind of building an AI product. Are there certain things, like, I'm just thinking about, like, if I wanted to build a blockchain technology company, I'm not necessarily the expert, but I may want to go search for co-founders who have some sort of experience in that space. Are there certain skill sets and technologies that folks should look for as they pursue that person?
I mean, for me, I've always been a first principles thinker when it comes to talent. I think it's about identifying excellent engineers, independent of whether or not they have blockchain experience or not. I think it's the same thing in AI, to be honest with you. AI is moving so fast that the expertise of, 2015 is not the expertise of 2024. So what you really want is people who can learn extremely fast and who can execute and deliver extremely fast, who can read the papers, who can look at the reference source code, and who can just figure it out within a week or two. Like, that's really what you want to look for. And it also depends on how deep in the stack you're going. If you're trying to do novel research in AI, then you're going to need PhDs, you're going to need a ton of money, you're going to need compute, you're going to need all these things. Right. If you're trying to build a compelling AI product that leverages existing models, and you just really want an engineer who can get stuff done,
Right.
So it depends on what your goals are from a business perspective. On the blockchain side, though, I think like blockchain is based on cryptography is the core technology. You
Mhm.
very rarely ever need to do any cryptography as a product builder. So it's not like AI where you need somebody with very deep expertise in the domain. In the blockchain space, the blockchain itself is a given.
Right.
Unless you're building your own blockchain, then you may need that. So again, it depends on what your business goals are.
Okay, right. So folks don't need to start by building their own blockchain. They could use existing technologies. And is that like Ethereum and some of the other?
It depends what you're trying to do. Like, let's say you say, okay, I've surveyed the landscape and I want to build a new blockchain that's going to be way more performant. Okay, then yes, now you're going to need a very strong cryptography background, C++, embedded systems background, distributed systems background. You're going to need all that stuff. If that's not what you're trying to do, if you're saying, no, I'm going to build some smart contracts that live on top of the blockchain, then you need somebody who can learn smart contract engineering. So it's different. But for application builders, yes, you want some experience with Ethereum, you want some experience with scaling solutions like L2s, you want experience with Solidity, which is the language to write smart contracts and those types of things.
Yeah, and kind of getting out of the weeds a little bit here. I'm about to go beyond my skis, so let me back up here. So the blockchain had its moment. It was hot. That was what everyone was talking about. Similar to what happened, and you had an AI winter at some point. I feel like blockchain entered its winter of sorts. As someone who was actually in the space, building in the space, I guess what was the catalyst for blockchain to fall out of favor? And did the market get it wrong? And are there opportunities that we're not recognizing at this point?
Fantastic question. I think it's helpful to not think about blockchain or AI as these like distinct things. I think it's more helpful to think about the future of society because society is changing very fast. And that includes crypto and blockchain and AI and the environment and energy, and all these things are changing extremely fast. And they're all going to play different roles in this future society that we're like, I mean, the rate of progress in technology is increasing every year. And so what's actually happening is not that, oh, nothing else matters, AI matters now. It's actually that, no, everything is changing. We're in the middle of everything changing. And as everything's changing, you'll have these different peaks from these different industry leaders. I mean, you're seeing it from healthcare, like, people working on aging and people working on different types of technologies for vaccines. Like every industry is having their moment in terms of showing what they're bringing to the table for the future of society. That's what's actually happening. And so with regard to what happened with blockchain to make it fall out of favor, I think there were a number of things in 2023. Well, first off, there's been these different iterations. So in 2017, you had these ICOs where there's the initial coin offerings, and that had its own set of problems, right? And then you had 2017, not 2017, then you fast forward to the future, 2021, where NFTs became explosive and people were making tons of money in the market. And then not everybody was able to make a return on that. And that creates a bad sentiment in the market. And then in 2022, you had these massive failures. You had FTX, you had 3 Hours Capital, you had, a number of different Luna, you had a number of different things that were just catastrophic in the space. So people lost tons of money, right?
Right.
So that can't be, discounted in terms of what that did to the sentiment. But overall, what's really happening, I think, is that you have these two different cycles. You have the cycle of people who want to invest money into a crypto token and hope that it goes up.
Right.
Which is kind of a short-term cycle. And then you have people that are trying to figure out what this new programmable world computer is going to mean in the next 20 years. And those are two completely different things. And it's two completely different types of investors. It's two completely different types of people that you're talking to. And we're more so on the side of, okay, this is a new computing paradigm, not a way for us to invest in tokens. And that is a longer cycle. That takes a lot longer for that stuff to mature and to become market ready. By analogy, with AI, transformers have been around for a very long time. The technology that everybody's seeing now with ChatGPT, which is explosive and amazing. Right. I saw that at Google pre-COVID. Google already had very similar technology. They were just waiting to make sure it was mature and safe and all the things that you have to do as a big company. So these things have been around. What happens is the work to make them understandable to the user takes a lot of time. and then they become widely adopted, and now it's like the norm. Everybody, yeah, I use ChatGPT, it's a normal thing. And smart contracts will have that moment in the future, I believe, as well, where it's exciting, it's going through a maturity phase, and then it's exciting again, and then somebody pops up with a user interface that makes it so intuitive that it's like, oh, of course I use smart contracts. I use smart contracts for everything. Like, I'm pretty sure that's the way it's going to feel when the stuff is mature.
Yeah, interesting point, right? I think, because so ICOs, NFTs, all those things are use cases of a larger, right, blockchain ecosystem, right? They just use blockchain, but there are certainly a number of different use cases. And because of negative press, some folks throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Interesting point you made though about ChatGPT, right? The user interface is about as easy as it can be. I type something in, and then I get out an answer to whatever my prompt was. So, but the point being that, yeah, the technology existed. It's just that it had to become usable by the end user, like very easy. The adoption, right? The adoption needed to be very easy so that it could spread like wildfire in the way that it has. I'm curious. So folks who are interested in Formless, how do they actually engage with the platform? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, we've gone through a number of iterations, and there's this famous book called The Innovator's Dilemma that predicts almost exactly what we've experienced, which is when you're dealing with these new innovative technologies, you're constantly trying to figure out what the market is. And so you have to have this strategy of put something in the market, learn as much as you can, go back and redo the whole thing. Put it in the market, learn as much as you can, go back and redo the whole thing. And that's been part of our experience. I wouldn't say redo the whole thing in terms of the vision. The vision has always been very clear for us, but in terms of the way the product functions in people's hands, that has had to be rethought as we've gotten market feedback and market traction. So all that being said, in the beginning, it's a protocol. So that means that developers can interact with it through the documentation. They can go into smart contracts and they can do that. We've had people do that. We've had people come into our ecosystem and say, hey, I just built this thing using your protocol. Take a look. And those are some of the most exciting moments when developers can do that. But then you also have like a consumer-facing thing, which is, okay, there's this really easy button that I can tap from Twitter and I can join a smart contract and now I'm making money as the tweet goes up, right? And that's really cool too. And then you have like the creator interface, which is, all right, well, how do I create one of these smart contracts? I don't know how to program. I don't know how to do any of that. I just need an easy way to do it.
Right.
And that has gone through a bunch of different iterations as well, where it's like, well, okay, you can do it. You just need to get your MetaMask set up and then you can do XYZ. And then like, well, you lost me at MetaMask. So, that's all. So all of that stuff is a constant, iteration of learning and refining and distilling and redoing that. So that's where we've been. Right now, the product is in this phase of transitioning from V1 to V2, which is V1 was we put something in the market, we learned all the things that you and I just talked about, and let's take all those learnings and actually optimize the product for that. And that's where we are now.
Okay, awesome. And just coming back to where the market was in terms of sentiment around blockchain, I mean, you guys have been able to, was it 2.2 million pre-seed from some very kind of reputable investors. Would love to learn more about what your experience was actually going out and raising funding, all things considered.
Yeah, fundraising is painful, but it's necessary, of course. Like I said, everything has changed in terms of the amount of expertise and resources that it takes to make a competitive product in the market these days. So for me, I'll start from the beginning. I went to this conference called Mainnet in New York City before I had left Google. And me and my co-founder, Jason, we were walking around talking to all these investors about how excited we were. We're going to revolutionize the internet. We're going to do all this stuff. And there was this one investor, but I'll never forget, he was really, an older guy, very wise. He goes, man, this is fascinating stuff. If you're so convinced about this, why haven't you left Google?
Right.
And so that taught me a very valuable lesson about fundraising, which was that you have to be your first believer. That's a very important first step. You have to be your first believer. And it transcends not just to leaving your job, but like even in terms of raising more capital, if you don't feel confident that putting more money into this is going to have an ROI, then why should anybody else feel that way? And so you really have to build that internal confidence as a prerequisite. So that was the catalyst for me to say, okay, let me put a timeline in place and plan my exit from Google. And I wanted to do it the right way because I loved my manager, I loved my team there, and I was managing other engineers. So I put together a timeline and then I resigned. Now, after that, you watch the movies, you think fundraise, okay, cool, now we're going to go out and raise all this money instant. That's not at all how it works. So my strategy was tiered. It was, okay, you want to start with the lowest cost money that you can find. Meaning if you can get grants, then that means you don't have to give any equity up. And then you can build momentum to then get to the next phase, which would be angel capital and then so on and so forth. So the first thing we did was we got a grant from Polygon, which is the first blockchain that we deployed to. And so that was a really good strategy because it gave us some credibility. It gave us some momentum. We now had a grant from Polygon. And then phase two was, okay, let me find some angel investors. And so angel investors typically are going to be people in your network who you know have a relatively high net worth. And the key thing to remember is you want to find somebody who has a mutual incentive around what you're doing, rather than just like a random rich person.
Right.
And so for me, the best person that fit that was Dallas Austin. So Dallas Austin was, he's this Grammy award-winning Hall of Fame writer, producer out of Atlanta who had supported me in my music career. And he knew the potential of what blockchain is going to do for the creator economy. He's excited, just as excited about that as I am. And he had been such a great mentor to me in music. I thought, let me just see what he would think about this idea. So, praise God, he became our first angel investor. And so that was huge. And one of the things I would say for any entrepreneur who's thinking about raising capital, the main thing you want to do is you want to have all your paperwork in place before you get the yes. Because if you get that yes, you don't have your paperwork in place, it might turn to a no before you get your paperwork in place. So you want to have all that stuff already lined up so that then all you have to do is send the DocuSign and you get it done. And so that was kind of phase one. And then what ends up happening from there is, and I had talked to some people who had raised money before to get this information, but you start to build a portfolio, just like a CRM, of people that you can reach out to and talk to. And you start to give them updates of progress that you're making. And so the fact that we got this grant, the fact that we got Dallas's investment, that stuff became meaningful, material evidence that things are progressing in the right direction. I also wrote a really strong white paper. The white paper that I published is how I got the attention of A16Z. Somebody from A16Z saw that on Twitter and actually DM'd me. Now, that didn't mean they invested on the spot. That didn't mean anything about that, but it meant that we now had a relationship, which over the course of a number of years could manifest future opportunities. So you really just want to have this conviction of, I'm moving forward no matter what. I'll give you guys updates of what's happening. And with each successive update, I can then repackage and give you a better update about where we are now in terms of position. And so that then progressed into Dharmesh Shah, who's the CTO of HubSpot. And he found out about us and he invested in 5 minutes. I mean, he literally didn't even meet me. He just read the email and said, okay, yep, I'm going to wire it today. And so successively, this starts to happen. And what you want to do is you take those resources, build more product, build more evidence, build more, and then package that and then go and repeat that cycle. And so this culminated in this process of raising to the relationship with A16Z maturing, and then them having the accelerator that they did in Los Angeles and them inviting me out to that. Okay. And that was because that was the biggest check on our cap table. And it also was sufficient evidence to then unlock a whole new set of investors. And so again, it's this multi-staged approach where you want to start with the lowest cost capital you can get and then progress, move up until you can fill out a round to do what you need to do.
Yeah, and that was a great point about the grants, because I think that is something that a lot of folks skip over, right? And don't really consider, and in a lot of ways, don't even really understand that grant funding is available. But yes, you can go out and get grant funding. And then the point you are making about building kind of validation through some of the content that you created. Folks read the content and said, oh, wow, okay, this is really interesting. But also staying in contact, right? So I understand what your idea is. It makes a lot of sense. I think it will be something big, but like, where are you with it? Right. And so that kind of like, as I see, okay, he's actually building this out. It's funny because a lot of investors ask that question. Well, you're working a full-time job now, right now. If you really believe this could be the next big thing, why haven't you made the jump? So also another interesting insight. Was it a requirement for you to do that, or did they make that a requirement for you to do that before they actually invested, put the money in?
I never spoke to that guy again. I mean, after that, yeah, he didn't become one of our investors, but that moment inspired me to think, okay, you know what, this is what I need to do. So there was no prerequisite condition on me leaving Google to secure investment. I had no relationship that said, if you leave Google, we'll invest. It was no, I need to leave Google before I can even have this conversation. Right. And then in doing so, it elevates the seriousness that you have in terms of what you're going to do, because you're not going to leave Google unless you have a serious plan. And so now you start to understand how this thing has a compounding effect of, okay, I need to take this to a different level over and over again.
Absolutely. I know we're coming up on time here, but we are just a bit into Q2. I wanted to save some times for you to anything interesting coming out of Formless that you would like to announce. And then for folks who want to check out the platform, learn more about you, where do we send them?
Yeah, so I'll do the last one first. So formless.xyz, formless.xyz has all of our information. Our vision is illuminating true human purpose through technology. You talked about AI, you talked about blockchain. We don't see ourselves as a blockchain company or a music company or that. We see ourselves as a tech company that wants to solve real problems and really be a part of the future of society. And we'll use AI to do that. We'll use blockchain to do that. We'll use regular C++ to do whatever it takes to do that is kind of who we are. In the coming weeks, we have some really exciting stuff because we have this really great community of people that have supported us from the beginning. And we do these like recurring Twitter spaces, we do the newsletter, and we have so many people that have supported us and they've been waiting to be able to do the same things that they've seen us do, but the technology just hasn't been self-service enough to do it. Like if you go to the product now, it's really a shell of what it should be because we've been just learning fast and trying to integrate those things in the product. So the self-service kind of platform and dashboard for people to be able to do these things like decentralize your own X post, decentralize your own video, build a community, do all these things. That is coming within the next couple of weeks, and that's something that we're really excited about. I'm also publishing an essay called The Death of an Artist, which to me is, I think we're at this important time where we need to revisit what artistry even is. I think that this idea of artistry as entertainment has kind of come to an end, and there are more important things that artists need to do. And so that's something I'm going to put out that I'm excited about as well.
Okay, nice. And then for folks who want to keep up with you, should they check you out on LinkedIn? What's the best way to keep up? I imagine you'll be publishing that essay if folks want to tune in.
Yeah, LinkedIn's great. Brandon Thorpe on LinkedIn. My middle name's Tory, so Brandon Tory you'll find on Instagram. Brandon Tory on Instagram and Twitter. On LinkedIn is Brandon Thorpe. And yeah, brandontory.com also as well as my website if you want to learn more about me and my experience.
All right, awesome, man. Yeah, I appreciate you allowing us to do a deep dive here. I think this has been, just kind of a glimpse into the future. So we look forward to keeping up with you and see how things progress.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Darius. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.